It is the far horizon, the place where the truth itself seems to vanish. Imagine a sailor who simply disappears, a ship that travels through solid islands, a plane that flies faster than its engine can go. These are the mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle. Once, researchers simply dismissed them, but now, new discoveries, brand new scientific theories are starting to explain what may be happening in this sea of lost ships. It is just a stretch of ocean, a few hundred square miles of water like any other. But here, there is something else at work, something inexplicable. In the geography of legends, the Bermuda Triangle is a territory strange and forbidding. Over the past century, it has claimed more than 1,000 lives. Freighters and sailboats, airplanes, vanished with nothing left behind. No bodies, no wreckage, only a mystery. For one young man, the triangle would hit home in an all too personal way. On a December evening more than 30 years ago, a father would set off into the Bermuda Triangle and never be seen again. His family would search for years, but they would not find him.
When something like this happens, your first instinct is to try to get over it or forget about it, but you don't.
For 3 decades, Michael Burak has been searching for his father, trying to find some kind of explanation, some long-lost clue. Dan Burak was a successful hotel executive, the family home, a secluded mansion on Miami's intercoastal waterway.
This is where I used to live. There's the dock where my dad used to keep the boat.
Dan's pride and joy was a 23-foot cabin cruiser, aptly named the Witchcraft. He loved to maintain it and to take his family out fishing on weekends. But on December 22nd, 1967, just a couple of nights before Christmas, something went wrong.
We had a guest over the house. His name was Father Horgan. He was a friend of the family. That particular night, it was a beautiful night. The sky was beautiful. The ocean was beautiful. So my father decided to take Father Horgan out in his boat to show him the skyline of Miami.
Michael wanted to go along, but it was already 9 o'clock, time for bed.
I watched my father and Father Horgan leave the dock, and that was the last time I ever saw him. Later on, I heard a tape of the conversation that my father had with the Coast Guard.
This distress call took place about a mile off Miami's shore when the boat suddenly ran into trouble.
Coast Guard, this is the Witchcraft. A glowing round shape hit my engine. I'm drifting. Witchcraft, this is Coast Guard Miami. Understand you are disabled off Miami Beach, is that correct? Disabled, Roger. Call my home and let them know I'm okay, would you? I just lost power. Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Affirmative, Witchcraft. This is Coast Guard Miami. Roger, where are you off Miami Beach? Off Government Cut, drifting north. I'm by buoy number 7. But my compass is spinning. I'm going to try to anchor and send up a flare. Witchcraft, this is Coast Guard Miami. We are sending out a boat immediately. Over. Roger. Please call my house. Right now I'm okay.
The message was never finished. No flare was shot off that night, and when the Coast Guard arrived at buoy 7, 20 minutes later, the Witchcraft had completely disappeared.
When they went out there, they should have found something, some debris, some cushions, some remnants that there was a boat there. and in worst case scenario, you know, a body or something, a bottle, but they found absolutely nothing.
No wreckage, no pieces, nothing. The Coast Guard searched the Bermuda Triangle for a week before giving up. Burak's family kept looking for years.
There was inquiries into Cuba and the islands and hospitals, you know, were checked to see if they had seen my father or Father Horgan and maybe had amnesia or something, but nothing ever was found.
Now, Michael is setting out to discover what really happened that night. Heading into dangerous water. The Witchcraft wasn't the first ship claimed by the Bermuda Triangle. The region has a long and lethal history of shipwrecks. The name itself was coined in a 1964 magazine article. But sailors have feared these waters for centuries. Even Christopher Columbus, back in 1492, reported unusual phenomena here. His compass was acting strangely. His crew saw mysterious lights. In the following years, mariners noticed that ships routinely vanished in these murky waters. By the 1800s, they had nicknamed the area the Sea of Lost Ships, and the legend of the Bermuda Triangle was born. A stretch of the Atlantic off America's southeastern coast, defined by 3 points: Bermuda, Miami, and San Juan, Puerto Rico. Some say it stretches further, from Norfolk, Virginia, down to the Caribbean. The region became notorious for volatile conditions, for storms and inexplicable tragedies. Is it more dangerous than any other stretch of water with severe weather? No one can say for sure. But Michael Burak needs to find out what happened to his father. How could the Witchcraft have disappeared without a trace, on a calm night in less than 20 minutes? Michael heads to Jones Boatyard to talk to Cliff DeFreitas about his father's boat.
You can see that, you know, the hull was fiberglass, and the boat was also constructed with a foam-injected hull. The manufacturer claimed that it was supposed to be unsinkable.
Well, unsinkable really is a misnomer, because she is going to sink. And any boat is going to sink. What it means, it won't go all the way to the bottom. It still has some reserve buoyancy.
So to find no debris in a situation like this would be very unusual.
It's very odd indeed, because from the pictures I see here, I see stuff like seat cushions, I see tackle boxes that are sealed. All of those would be left floating around in this area. And I don't see in 20 minutes' time all traces of a boat like this vanishing.
But could the answer lie on the ocean's floor? That's the premise of one new scientific theory. At the Naval Academy's postgraduate school in Monterey, California, they've been studying the physics of boats for years. Dr. Bruce DiNardo has proven there's a way to disrupt the buoyancy of water, what holds a ship afloat. It starts with a sudden eruption of bubbles.
When there are a sufficient number of bubbles in here and the buoyant force can no longer support a ship, it should sink, take on water, go to the bottom and stay there.
Dr. DiNardo's theory? A release of gas from the ocean floor can create enough bubbles to take down an entire boat, and rapidly. It could be any kind of gas, but the sea is known to harbor naturally formed pockets of methane gas trapped in ice, called methane hydrate.
As you might be sitting in a boat, it may be very calm water. If the methane splits up into a number of smaller bubbles, the sea would become abruptly very foamy around you. It would probably smell very bad. You'd probably be able to smell it. But it would not take long, if there are enough bubbles, it would not take long before you and the ship just went right down.
The boats would seem to vanish without a trace. Here's what it might look like.
Okay, so this is like a canoe, and this made out of plastic. This should very easily float. In fact, I expect it'll sit high it sits very high in the water. Okay, so let's turn on the bubbles now. And I'm slowly increasing the amount of bubbles. A lot of turbulence. Now there's more and more foam is on the surface, but I think you can see the boat is sitting deeper in the water. And water's spilling in, and whoa. Well, our model boat, it just sank to the bottom and stayed there, and it's all intact.
As the water becomes lighter than air, a craft that normally floats sinks like a rock. DiNardo knows of one documented example, a trawler brought down by methane in the North Sea.
Most scientists believe that there have been methane eruptions in the past. It has actually caused the ship to sink. This is in an area called Witch's Hole. There's this large pockmark in the ocean, which presumably came about due to a violent methane eruption. And there's a boat sitting there intact at the bottom. And it's suspected that the methane eruption, which caused the pockmark, also caused the ship to sink.
It's even taken down an entire oil rig. One of the richest methane pockets in the world has been reported on the northern edge of the triangle, not far from the area the Witchcraft went down. Marine geologists from NOAA and the Department of Energy have already begun examining these methane pockets to learn more.
I've heard a lot of people who go out in the ocean tell me, oh yeah, it happens all the time. Oh yeah, we saw these bubbles and we smelled the methane. We have taken what we feel is a first step, just a controlled experiment in the laboratory. We really have to leave it to other people who are knowledgeable about what goes on in the ocean, I think, to take it further.
For Mike Burak, it's a start, a direction his investigation can take over the coming days. But other mysteries, it doesn't begin to explain. Like the airborne ones, dozens of planes that have gone down in the Bermuda Triangle. The most famous, the strange disappearance of Flight 19. It was a routine training mission just after World War II. A flight of 5 Navy Avenger planes heading out of Fort Lauderdale. December 5th, 1945 had dawned bright and sunny. The flight was going fine until the team reported back. The sky looked strange. They were having navigation problems. Then suddenly, communication with all 5 planes was lost. So the Navy sent out a larger plane, a rescue flight with 13 men on board to search for them. And that plane disappeared too. The Navy was left to mourn the loss. 6 airplanes, 27 men who would never be found. Hundreds of planes have vanished in the triangle, and it hasn't stopped. Coming up, one woman takes us straight into the vortex. Lots of people talk about the strange phenomena of the Bermuda Triangle, but few have actually encountered them. Like this woman, an eyewitness to one of the most baffling incidents in the Florida skies. Someone who faced the triangle at its worst and survived. On March 30th, 1995, private pilot Carrie Trantham nearly died in the airways above the Bermuda Triangle. She's come back to confront her demon and to find out why her life almost ended that night.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Are you ready to go fly?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Carrie wants to revisit the spot where she dueled the triangle, but only if professional pilot Stuart Hanley is at the helm.
The experience as a whole has been something that has been with me for years. It's something every time I get into an airplane I think about.
Carrie knows the history of the region, the flights to nowhere. December 27th, 1948, Captain Robert Lindquist was heading a commercial flight from San Juan, Puerto Rico to Miami, Florida. A flight packed with vacationers returning home. 50 miles from their destination, they radioed in. But when the tower called back, it got no reply. The plane had simply vanished from the sky. Investigating officials worked furiously to discover how a seasoned pilot could disappear on a clear night. Search parties scoured the area where the plane was assumed to have crashed, but not a single trace was ever found. As for Carrie, her journey began 8 years ago in Daytona Beach. She had flown there to visit her daughter. As she prepared for the flight home to Key West, she discovered a storm was moving in. So she plotted a different route, one that would keep her well out of danger, or so she thought. What she hadn't counted on was the fact that this route took her straight into a corner of the Bermuda Triangle. Traveling across Florida to Tampa and down the west coast, it was an easy trip, at first. The clouds were behind her and clear skies ahead.
Things were looking great. You know, I could see the lights of Miami, and I was just totally amazed. It looked so gorgeous.
Then, in one terrible moment, everything changed.
All of a sudden, it was like somebody threw a blanket over the airplane. I was in total darkness.
The plane began to buck across the sky. Then things got really scary.
I looked at the instruments and they were going crazy on me. The attitude indicator was wobbling all over. It looked like the compass was going in circles, and I wasn't sure if I was upside down or right side up. I was petrified. I was scared to death. In fact, I panicked.
Carrie did the only thing she could. She called for help.
Help, can anybody hear me?
I tried 5 or 6 times to make radio contact, but nobody responded. I felt very scared and very alone.
Alone and lost, and low on fuel. Was it all just a storm or something more? How could anyone explain what was going on? Stephen Walton is a professor of astrophysics at Cal State Northridge. He's spent decades studying electromagnetism at work. Electromagnetics is one of the basic forces of nature. You can't see it, but its effects are everywhere, from the aurora borealis to right inside your house.
Almost all of 20th century technology is based on electromagnetism. The Industrial Revolution was made possible by the discovery of electromagnetism.
The Earth generates electromagnetic fields. They crisscross the planet.
What I've got here is just a plastic box that has some iron filings and a light oil, so they're free to move around, but they don't make a mess. If I put a bar magnet down on my overhead projector, and then put the box with the iron filings on top of it, you can see the iron filings start to move in response to the magnetic field of the magnet. If you look at any textbook drawing of the Earth's magnetic field, it represents the Earth's magnetic field as if it had a magnet like this one at its center, with the magnetic field lines coming up out of one pole and going in through the other pole. It's not literally true the Earth has a bar magnet in the middle, but it's a pretty good metaphor for the Earth's magnetic field.
Some places on Earth have much stronger electromagnetic and geomagnetic forces running through them. The Bermuda Triangle is one of those areas. These strong magnetic fields can have a strange impact, from odd climactic conditions to unusual fluctuations of radios and electronic gauges.
A sufficiently strong electromagnetic field can have a serious effect on any kind of electronic equipment, if it's sufficiently strong.
And it seems that was just what was happening to Carrie Trantham and her little Cessna. Inside her cockpit, she was living a nightmare. Her instruments were going crazy, and her plane was being buffeted from side to side. Things were getting bad, and they were about to get a whole lot worse.
It's either get this airplane in level flight or I'm going to end up in the Gulf and nobody will ever find me.
Carrie was certain she was facing the end.
I was scared, I was panicked, but I knew one thing. I did not want to end up being another lost plane in the Bermuda Triangle.
Coming up, Carrie's final discovery. High above the Atlantic, Carrie Trantham was living through the most nerve-wracking flight of her life. Alone, lost in the darkness, she feared the worst. Then, with a terrifying suddenness, the skies cleared and the voice of an air traffic controller cut through, directing her back to land.
6 here, Quebec. There's traffic in the area, but we'll clear you to land.
When I finally landed, I was totally exhausted.
Now safe on the ground, Carrie was still shaking.
I had to pry my hands off the yoke, you know, and when I crawled out I actually had to crawl out of the airplane, and when I put my feet on the ground, I could barely walk.
And only then did she learn how close to dying she had come.
I was almost out of fuel. I got trouble because they barely got the airplane to the pumps to fuel it up, so it was very scary.
Today, she's returned to the spot where she almost met her end. She hopes to learn something more about what happened that night, the forces at work on her voyage through the Bermuda Triangle.
This is where I was when it happened, when I felt like the blanket was blown over me. It was like I was right on the edge of the Everglades, flying right down the coastline.
But now the area looks as calm and welcoming as a travel poster. There are no clues to be gathered today about that terror-filled night. Professional pilot Stuart Hanley doubts there ever were. He rejects the idea of strange forces at work in the Bermuda Triangle. He thinks the answers are much simpler.
I think several things happen to you. One was the effects of spatial disorientation, which happens when you fly into clouds or other weather phenomena.
Spatial disorientation occurs when the inner ear, which controls balance, gives the pilot one message about the way she's facing, while her flying instruments tell her the opposite. The result, confusion and vertigo.
Stuart, why do you think I lost radio contact?
Well, there are areas out there where you are operating that are just dead air, where you're unable to talk to anyone.
Why does that happen, Stuart?
That's a tough one. I really don't know.
On the hunt for answers, Carrie visits Jim Lusheen, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service.
About what time of year did this occur?
Well, it happened like March the 30th, 1995, and it was late in the evening.
Lusheen checks the weather for that day and discovers that thunderstorms were brewing in the area.
We actually do see a stalled front from Florida across the Gulf of Mexico there.
Carrie insists she was ahead of the storm, that the skies before her were clear.
We could have had a rain shaft actually come down ahead of the main thunderstorm itself, and that would have caused a restriction in visibility, even though you weren't flying right in the thick of things there. So, you know, I had to be right in it to actually experience some of the effects of it.
What would cause my instruments to malfunction?
When you get a thunderstorm, that causes quite a bit of electrification of the air around it. And electromagnetic radiation can cause deviations of compasses and other types of instruments. The lightning actually can extend out to 10, 20 miles away from the actual thunderstorms themselves.
Canadian scientist John Hutchison has been experimenting with this kind of electromagnetic phenomena for decades.
I've been studying electromagnetism for many, many years, 30, 40 years, about that, I think. And always fascinated by its effects. This kind of stuff is like little doorways into nature where you can't see it, but you can hear it.
Over the years, he's accumulated a strange and wonderful assortment of gadgets to study the unknown effects of electromagnetism. And working alone in this isolated lab, he's gotten some surprising results. Startling findings that even seem to defy the understandings of conventional science. His work has been labeled science on the fringe, but governmental researchers are still trying to puzzle out the significance of these experiments. Using only strong electromagnets, Hutchison has been able to make objects levitate and shoot up into the air, crush steel, snap iron bars in half without ever touching them. This has become known as the Hutchison effect.
The Hutchison effect was an accidental discovery I made. It's levitation, things turn transparent, stuff floating across the room, metals turning into other materials, metals falling apart. It was once called the Pandora's box of magical tricks.
How does this work? How do invisible waves cause objects to move and snap? To many, it might seem magical, even bizarre. But to Hutchison, there are a lot of things we can't see that are real all the same. You can't see a television signal, but the picture still appears on your TV set. And if you can accept the principle, the ramifications are extraordinary.
Electromagnetic energies, its powers can be actually quite immense. In such reports I have seen, it has actually taken people and thrown them across the land. It has set off fireballs, which have been recorded. And in the Bermuda Triangle, of course, it's sent and taken ships and planes way off course where they wind up into weird areas.
Electromagnetic activity has been documented throughout the Bermuda Triangle. Most dramatically, according to the Coast Guard itself, the Bermuda Triangle is one of only 2 spots on Earth where the compass points in a different direction, to true north, not magnetic north. According to the Coast Guard, it confuses many sailors and leads unsuspecting navigators astray.
A lot of aircraft and also ships and that will get lost in the triangle because simply their compass systems will go off course 10 degrees. These planes could go way off course and land in the middle of the ocean.
An area called the Devil's Sea off the east coast of Japan is the other location known to exhibit similar magnetic characteristics, and it too is known for its mysterious disappearances. So clearly, as Hutchison believes, there are some electromagnetic anomalies at work in these regions.
Many years ago, the Coast Guard would try and monitor the electromagnetic signals by using VLF radio receivers, much like the ones in here. And they'd tune in and they would pick up such things as whispering sounds, but they didn't know what it was. So they researched it and sort of just left it.
The Coast Guard believes that most of the disappearances in the triangle are simply the result of unpredictable weather, of storms and waterspouts, and poorly prepared navigators out on pleasure cruises. They blame inexperienced sailors who may think it's a balmy stretch of ocean, but don't realize just how fast things can turn bad here. But there have been cases in the triangle that not even the Coast Guard could explain. Cases where boats survived and the sailors disappeared. When we return, the strange tale of the ghost ship, the boat that sailed home without its captain. A ship that vanished, then reappeared a week later, hundreds of miles away. A sailor who was never seen again. Events terrifying and inexplicable. For Jim Olszewski and his sister Mary Gordon, it's a story with an all-too-human cost.
Our brother Tom disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle on June 8th, 2001.
Mary and Jim have been trying to reconcile themselves to their brother's strange fate, but they just can't figure out what happened to him.
All of the facts tell me that Tom is gone, but my heart tells me that he's still out there somewhere.
Tom Olszewski was a retired Navy officer and lifelong sailor. With his experiences at sea, he laughed at the idea of a Bermuda Triangle.
In 1999, he and his girlfriend Betsy retired and decided to fulfill their lifelong dream of sailing around the world.
Their home was the Tropic Bird, a luxurious 39-foot single-masted sloop moored in Trinidad. When Betsy became ill in early 2001 and flew to Annapolis, Maryland for treatment, Tom made plans to sail up to join her.
When I heard that he was going to go single-handed, I was a little bit concerned because I'm not a sailor, although Tom had every confidence.
He was wild with anticipation. He sent emails out to all the family relatives, and he called it his excellent adventure.
Tom figured it would take between 2 and 3 weeks to sail from Trinidad to Annapolis, a journey of almost 2,000 nautical miles. He set off from Trinidad on the morning of June 7, 2001. Before leaving, he arranged to check in with friends every day to let them know he was okay.
On the first day, they received test messages from Tom. On the second and third day, they received no calls from Tom at all.
When they hadn't heard from him by June 11th, Tom's friends got worried. They called the Coast Guard, and a massive search and rescue operation was launched. It grew even bigger over the next 72 hours. But the days ticked by, a week passed, and still no one had spotted Tom or the Tropic Bird. Then on June 20th, Tom's family got the call they'd been dreading.
A tugboat crew found the Tropic Bird in a little secluded bay on the southern portion of Antigua. The boat was in perfect condition, but Tom wasn't on board.
When they got onto the boat and started looking around, they found possessions of Tom. They found his wallet, they found his glasses, they found the log of the Tropic Bird, as well as Tom's journal on board with unfinished entries.
It looked as if Tom had stopped writing in mid-sentence.
The last log entry in Tom's boat read, June 8th, 2001, 12:56 p.m. I am 11 miles off the coast of Grenada. I am making good time. And then it just ends.
Who or what had interrupted Tom. How is it that his boat disappeared, then reappeared a week later, with no one at the helm? Where had Tom gone? This man believes he has the answer. For the past 10 years, marine physicist Hans Graber has been studying a phenomenon known as rogue waves.
Rogue waves occur more frequently than people like to believe.
In a wave tank, Hans shows Mary and Jim how rogue swells work, how abrupt downbursts of strong winds can cause waves to suddenly triple in size.
Loom into existence without any warning, and they have a few seconds of their glory of being very destructive, and then it's all over, it's gone.
Is it possible for Tom's boat to survive seas like this?
Yes, smaller ships have sometimes better chances to survive. They can simply ride out on top of the big waves like a nutshell, just bobbing up and down.
A rogue wave could knock an unprepared mariner right overboard.
If you have a wave with such a destructive force hitting you, unless you tie down, it could easily just knock you off the deck.
If Tom was swept overboard by a rogue wave, he'd certainly have drowned in the turbulent sea. But waves can't explain what happened to the boat itself. And here is where the story gets very odd. For with no one on board, no captain to steer, the Tropic Bird didn't crash. It wasn't shipwrecked. Instead, like a ghost ship, it sailed right into a secluded harbor, all by itself. How did the Tropic Bird get all the way to Antigua on its own? From a last recorded sighting off the coast of Grenada, heading due north, winding through a labyrinth of islands, west of Guadalupe, east of Montserrat, and into a small bay on the north side of Antigua. How did it navigate this path without a pilot and without a scratch? To find out, Mary and Jim have arranged a meeting with Lieutenant Commander Stephen Leslie, the Coast Guard officer who led the search for their brother.
With the first report we got, we flew one of our jet aircraft all the way along the island chain down to Trinidad. We offset by about 30 miles out and flew that track line back up.
Coast Guard rescue planes searched 24 hours a day for more than a week. Other investigators cast a wider net.
We checked his credit cards to see if, in fact, he had stopped somewhere, made charges on his card, which would give us an indication of where he would be. We had mustered assistance from the Dutch, the French. We had several aircraft that were flying that were blanketing this area, literally, with aircraft in the sky. And yet, this 39-foot boat could not be sighted.
When the Tropic Bird was finally discovered in Antigua after a 9-day search, the strange saga of Tom and the Tropic Bird became even stranger.
The boat was fully intact, no damages to it. All the gear was still energized. The sails were up. It was sitting on the reef, but there was no damage to the hull. It was certainly a moment of sitting back and going, what have we got here?
According to the Coast Guard, Tom Olszewski is just another man lost at sea. But it's not that simple to Commander Leslie.
Well, in fact, in my mind, there are two mysteries associated with this particular case. The first one is it would have taken him perhaps 2.5 days to 3 days to arrive where the vessel was found off Antigua. So the mystery is, where could that boat have been for 6 or 7 days without being sighted?
How did the Tropic Bird make that 300-mile journey, weaving through the islands with no one at the helm?
But it's for it to make a straight line, miss Guadalupe, sail in between Montserrat, and a boat under sails, driving a straight line, it's not normal.
And finally, how did it end up in an enclosed bay without a scrape?
There is no way that it could have got inside that bay on its own, navigating itself. But yet there was no one on board the vessel. This particular case will remain a mystery in my mind in terms of what actually happened.
How is it possible? The story makes no sense, and Commander Leslie has no answers. It is a tale that will continue to haunt the brother and sister of Tom Olszewski. a plane takes a mysterious leap through time and space, rocketing to speeds considered unexplainable. Bruce Gernon has spent most of his life flying. He started as a teenager. Today, he's a full-fledged flight instructor. But in all the thousands of hours airborne he's logged, one trip stands out as the strangest he's ever experienced. It all happened on December 4th, 1970, in less than an hour. To this day, Bruce has no explanation for what occurred. A flight that took him from Andros Island to Palm Beach, Florida in 47 minutes, with no tailwind, 1.5 times faster than the top speed of his airplane. How did he get from the Bahamas to the mainland faster than his plane can fly? 3,000 feet up in the air, Bruce Gernon is making a pilgrimage to the place where the Bermuda Triangle changed his life. According to Bruce, the encounter was half science fiction.
I realized that something very important had happened, something that might help mankind and meteorology and electricity and science in the future. So I committed myself to memorizing the flight.
Bruce is on his way to Andros Island, 75 miles south of Bimini, where his extraordinary journey began.
It's always been a land of mystery, especially in the Bimini area and Andros Island. And it's in between those two islands where I believe most of this electromagnetic energy seems to form.
Bruce and his father left Andros at 3 o'clock that fateful afternoon. Gernon was only 23, but he had already been flying for more than 6 years, and conditions seemed perfect. His Beechcraft Bonanza 836 was in top shape, and everything appeared normal for the first 20 minutes of the flight. Then, Bruce came face to face with a vast cloud, rising 50,000 feet up into the air. Even worse, it seemed to come right out of the ocean, which didn't leave him many choices.
I couldn't fly under it, and I couldn't fly over it, so I decided to penetrate into it. There was an unusual electronic storm going on inside. It was flashing, kind of like an electric strobe light. The deeper we went, the brighter the flashes became, and the darker it became.
Bruce knew he had to get out of this electrical storm, and fast. He turned the plane around and got a nasty surprise. The cloud had encircled him, and there was no way out.
I was trapped inside this huge donut-shaped thunderstorm.
Bruce thought he had gotten lucky when he saw a tunnel in the cloud, a small patch of blue sky at the other end, miles away.
Well, I had been warned about tunnels that form high up in between thunderstorms, and the old-timers used to call them sucker holes. And one flight instructor, he said, "Don't ever try to fly through one. You'll never make it."
But he felt it was take the risk or die. He charged toward the tunnel at full throttle and almost immediately regretted his decision.
By the time that I reached the tunnel, it had decreased its diameter down to maybe only 500 feet. And when the aircraft penetrated into the tunnel, immediately these strange swirling lines formed the entire length of the tunnel, and they were rotating counterclockwise.
Even worse, the hole at the end of the tunnel was shrinking. Bruce shot out of the cloud just in time.
It felt like we were floating and yet going forward at a rapid rate. And when I looked back, I could see the tunnel had immediately collapsed, and we had just made it.
But as soon as Bruce escaped the cloud, the blue sky he'd been aiming for disappeared. He found himself in the middle of a strange gray fog, unlike anything that he'd ever seen. And just then, all his instruments began to fail.
The compass was slowly rotating counterclockwise. The ADF, the automatic direction finder, was also just sort of spinning around.
So Bruce used his wristwatch to try to figure out where they were. He'd been flying for a half hour, so he knew they must be getting close to Bimini. He contacted air traffic control in Miami, about 90 miles away, to get their precise location.
And they tried to locate us. They were unsuccessful. And we had just installed a new electronic transponder instrument.
Shrouded in fog, Bruce waited and waited as the air traffic controller tried to find him.
2 minutes later, the radar controller came back on the radio, and he's like screaming that he located an airplane directly over Miami Beach.
Bruce checked his watch again. It was 3:33, just half an hour after takeoff.
I told him, no, that couldn't be us because I'm still looking for Bimini, and I'm about probably 80 miles due east.
At that instant, the gray fog vanished. Bruce was blinded by the bright blue sky.
Then my eyes started to focus on the land below us, and it was Miami Beach. And I checked my watches, and it had only taken 30 minutes.
How had he gotten there so soon? It was 3:47 when Bruce and his father landed in Palm Beach outside of Miami. The numbers for the 200-mile trip were noted in the logbook, recorded in black and white, but Bruce knew they didn't add up.
I checked the time, and it had only taken 47 minutes, where in the past, I had never done it in less than 75 minutes.
He had averaged 320 miles an hour in a plane that can barely do over 220. How had he shaved half an hour off the trip? What had happened when he entered that cloud? Bruce wonders if electromagnetic energy could have something to do with what happened that day. And John Hutchison agrees.
Electromagnetic forces at that time with Bruce Gernon being propelled was just right. He was caught in it and seen very unusual things, and I've actually seen that in some of my experimental work where things happen that are pretty spooky.
Hutchison theorizes that Bruce's plane was simply pulled along in some kind of geomagnetic tide, like getting caught up in a jet stream or a fast current in the ocean. There is one other possible explanation, and it's even stranger.
The only way I could explain it would be by saying that it was a space-time warp.
Einsteinian physics say it is hypothetically possible for gravity to bend space and time near black holes. Bruce and John insist that the same principles may apply here.
With Bruce there traveling through that vortex, he could have ran into a wrinkle of time or a small loop of time that excelled him into another time period.
But for mainstream scientists, they don't buy it. They say time warps are pure science fiction.
If someone claims that they lost 30 minutes of their life, I would suspect that they had simply made some kind of mistake. Human senses are very easy to fool. That's why we have spent so much effort building instruments.
In the coming decades, we will surely continue to learn more about electromagnetism and other phenomena no one has yet considered. Skeptics may argue that the strange disappearances and bizarre events are just the misfortunes of an unlucky few, caught in weather conditions beyond their experience. But those who have personally felt the Bermuda Triangle's touch are convinced there is something far subtler going on, something more ominous.
You can't explain everything that happens in the Bermuda Triangle. I will never fly through there at night again.
What happened to me in the Bermuda Triangle has had such an impact on my life that I have spent the last 33 years trying to understand it.
But no matter the stories, no matter the physics, for some, the Bermuda Triangle is not about science or magic. It's just a watery grave, a place they lost a piece of their lives.
I've heard of the Bermuda Triangle, but I never realized how dangerous it was until it took my brother from me.
And in many ways, the victims, like Michael Burak, have never stopped looking for their loved ones. And perhaps they never will.
I always thought that if I had a terminal disease or if I knew I wasn't going to live very much longer, that I would get a boat, name it the Witchcraft, come out government cut on December 22nd, and see what happened to my father.
In the end, then, the Bermuda Triangle is not so much a place as a question waiting for an answer. Not a geographical location, but a void, a great emptiness stretching out to the horizon, a hole in the ocean, and the hearts of those left behind.